is Dave. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Zilog and Moto channel. For those of you that are wondering, who's this Dave guy? And why should I care? Because I know like a million guys named Dave. Or, what's Zilog and Moto? Or, where did I leave my keys last night? Well, I hope to at least help you with a few of those questions today. First off, what exactly is Zilog and Moto? In short, Zilog and Moto is an online video channel dedicated to video game reviews. Yeah, I know you're yawning already. But Dave, aren't there already approximately 13,000 channels on YouTube for this? I mean, probably. I lost track after the first few thousand. New games, old games, crappy games, good games. It's all out there already. So what would drive me to create a channel in 2019 when there's already tons of great and even more crappy content out there? What makes me think I have something of value to bring to the table? Well, to be honest, nothing. This whole thing could be an abysmal failure that I give up on after the first 5 episodes that I've already got scripted out. There's plenty of guys and girls out there that are pretty great at this and have been doing this stuff for years. Do I think I'm as good as those guys? No way. But they have given me inspiration to at least try, and that's what I'm going to do. For a few years now, I'd thought about doing some sort of channel, just for myself. It was a way of me documenting which games I'd played, as a way to kind of force myself to play new games and have new experiences, rather than just play the same old games over and over. I mean, how many times can you play Doom? And I'm leaving some of those videos up for now, just as a historical record. But the more I did those videos, and the more I watched other guys that are actually good at this sort of thing, like James Rolfe, John Hancock, Metal Jesus Rocks, and Pat Contry, I kind of realized, man, I'm really shitty at this. So, due to being busy with work and the realization that I was seriously putting the amateur in amateur photography, I kind of put those videos on hold. I didn't want to continue to keep wasting time on something that no one wanted to see, including myself. Because, as I've definitely found, as I've gotten older, time is by far the most valuable commodity. However, I didn't stop playing games or collecting them. And as my collection grew, I started to really specialize on a system that most of my youth was based on, the Sega Genesis. Or if you're not in the United States, the Mega Drive. Both names are awesome. Technically, the first console I ever had is what's commonly referred to as an Atari 2600 Junior, which was a cheaper version of the Atari 2600 released in 1986. Yeah, no wood finish on this one. Yes, while my friends were playing with the original NES, I was stuck with a console that would have been long dead and buried had it not been for the video game crash of the mid-80s. Fast forward a couple years, and I think my parents kind of knew that the Atari wasn't getting it done, and they felt bad for me. So for Christmas, I got my first 16-bit console, a Model 1 Genesis with Sonic the Hedgehog as a pack-in. This was my go-to system for the next 4 years or so. I'd get games from Electronics Boutique, and yeah, I still call Electronics Boutique and not GameStop, where my uncle worked as a manager. I'd trade him to a local shop called Software Seconds, which actually, as of this video, is still in business. And I'd rent from Blockbuster. Oh, I'd rent from Blockbuster. I was even the store champion on the Genesis at 2 different locations in 2 years they did the World Game Championship in the mid-90s. By this time, things were slowly changing. The mid-90s saw the Saturn and the PlayStation take over the market as the 32-bit era began in earnest. And it was a good time. I eventually owned both systems due to getting a job in high school, along with the 3DO. But I always had a soft spot for the Genesis. Eventually, the years moved on, times changed. Sega bowed out of the console race, passing the torch on their partner on the Dreamcast, Microsoft. I continued to follow Microsoft and Sony through the generations, and occasionally Nintendo when there was something exceptional to seek out, like say Resident Evil or something like that. Then one day after I went to the gym, okay, yeah, make your jokes. Yes, I was at the gym. Anyway, next door to the gym in the strip mall was a Goodwill. So I walked over there after my workout just to see what they had. In their expensive case, I noticed 2 games, Quartet and I think Choplifter. They weren't very expensive, and they both had their manuals and cases intact, so I picked them up, even though at the time I didn't have a console to play them on. This was the start of a quest of sorts. I made the decision that I wanted to collect all the games that could be played on the Genesis platform. Now, if you're paying attention, Quartet and Choplifter are Master System games, not Genesis games. But I knew from back in the day that Master System games could be played on the Genesis if you had what's called the power base converter. And here's the basis for the channel name, a few minutes after I finally started trying to answer the question. The Master System was based around the Zilog Z80 8-bit processor, whose family had been used in numerous home computer devices as a replacement for the Intel 8080. And while it was an older piece of hardware with its origins going back to 1976, it was powerful enough to outpace the NES. Yes, you heard that right. The Master System was decidedly more powerful than the NES. However, due to a number of factors, it simply wasn't able to compete with Nintendo in the US, which led to Sega going back to the drawing board when it concerned their next entry in the console market. Enter the Genesis. The Genesis was designed around another venerable processor, the Motorola 68000, which also was used in the Atari ST, the Amiga, and Macintosh home computers, and was powerful enough to deliver graphics of near arcade quality on a much reduced price. But what of the Master System library of games? Due to the issues mentioned before with Nintendo and third-party game developers in the 1980s, Sega needed to build up their library of titles by any means possible. To address this, Sega decided to go with a concept that Atari had previously employed on the 7800 called backwards compatibility, where you could take a 2600 cartridge, plug into a 7800, and play the game just like it was a 2600. Nowadays, with more powerful consoles, there's two ways to achieve this: hardware and software emulation. For instance, let's take the early case of the PlayStation 3. If you got one of the original ones, it has the ability to play PlayStation 1 and 2 titles using hardware emulation, due to the fact Sony designed the PS3 with a PS2 processor, the Emotion Engine, built right on the motherboard. This proved expensive to produce, so in the next revision of the PS3, the Emotion Engine was removed from the console, and the PS3 had to use software emulation to play PS2 titles. Due to software emulation being an approximation of PS2 hardware rather than actual PS hardware, this caused a spike in compatibility problems and burned out PS3s due to the strain that was now being put on the hardware to do the calculations needed to emulate the games. In 1988, this level of power was unheard of, and certainly not affordable to put into a console, so Sega went with an ingenious idea. They made the Motorola 68000 function as the main CPU for the console, but then added the Z8080 processor to handle the sound, which allowed the power base converter to snap on, switch the Genesis to Master System mode, and grant the player access to the entire Master System library. Now you get where the channel name comes from. Zilog for the Z80A processor, and Moto for the 68000. And that was a very long explanation for a pretty simple question. I hope you've been taking notes for the test later. Along with plugging the power base converter in the Genesis, there's two other probably more famous or infamous, as the case may be, add-ons, and I'll be covering games for those add-ons as well. The first is the Sega CD, which gave Genesis fans their first taste of the next console generation, and the Sega 32X, a 32-bit add-on for the Genesis, which I think somewhat gets unfairly criticized, but nonetheless was a failure. This means, based around this one piece of hardware, you can have a library of that consists of 4 separate console offerings. So that's what we're going to look at here on Zilog and Moto. My goal, I know it's pretty ambitious, is to review and record videos of each of the 1,200 or so games I've picked, which make up the Master System, Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X libraries. That includes all the US releases, the European and Brazilian English releases, and a handful of Japanese releases that I think are worthy of note. So, some quick math. If I was to review one game a week until I've covered all 1,200 in my list, that'll take roughly 23 years. Let's be honest, the way things are going right now, World War III may have taken place by then, much less YouTube continuing to exist, so I'll try to release reviews a bit quicker than that. Also, a quick note about the game footage you'll be seeing on the channel. All the video from this original will be on original Genesis hardware that you'll see in front of you, captured with a Micom Soft XRGB Mini FrameMeister into an Elgato USB capture device. Obviously, I won't be able to get footage from every game this way, but before I emulate anything, I'll make sure to let you guys know in the video. I want these reviews to be as authentic as to the original experience as possible, Aside from the crappy quality of old school CRT televisions, I don't care. They're terrible. Now, as to the second question I posed earlier, who am I and why should you care? Well, my name is Dave Stokes, and I've worked in the IT field for 20 years. I've played video games for the last 32 years, and I've owned 15 consoles that I've actually played games on, and not just had for showpieces or collectors. I currently own well over 1,100 games, including the 470 behind me, that make up about 40% of the library I hope to eventually own for the channel. I'm sure there's plenty out there that are far more hardcore about gaming than I myself am, as I try to be somewhat balanced about having different interests. But I do consider myself pretty knowledgeable when it comes to this sort of thing, and I do think I can speak with a decent amount of authority about the time period these games were released in, the cultural references they make, and, well, whether they suck or not. Although, beauty can definitely be in the eye of the beholder on some of these. Keep an eye on the channel, and subscribe if you like, and hopefully you'll get something worth watching from me at least once a week that tells another chapter of Sega's history. And one thing you'll never see on this channel is paid advertisements. I just don't believe in them. And this isn't my primary job, it's just a hobby. From time to time, I'll give shout-outs to things I like or enjoy. Like, for instance, I had Taco Bell for dinner. Are they paying me? No, but I like them. But there'll never be quid pro quo. No one's ever going to send me stuff and I'm going to do a review for it. It'll simply because I like discussing things that make my life better. Oh, and for the last question earlier, they fell out of your pocket and they're in the middle of the couch, under the cushion. You should probably vacuum under there while you're at it. Peace.